Hi everyone. So let's start our today's session over understanding the and deep diving into the couple of more interfaces. So long back we discussed the Spring Security internal flow. I hope you remember the internal flow. Inside this internal flow, like you can see the authentication providers, they are going to leverage two different components to actually perform the authentication. The first one is the user detail manager or user detail service or the password encoders. By now, I am assuming that you are clear about the role of password encoders and user detail manager or user detail service. But now you may have a question: what is the user detail manager and what is the user detail service? Under which scenarios we need to use user detail service and under which scenarios we need to use the user detail manager. If you have any confusion around the password encoders, don't worry. We will discuss this in a separate video where we are going to talk everything about password encoders, hashing, how they internally working, and so in the same section we are going to get clarity around the password encoders. For now, let's try to understand on this component, which is user detail manager or user detail service. This is the slide that I have created to clear your confusion around the user detail manager and user detail service interface and its implementation. So at the very top, we have an interface which is user detail service. So inside this interface, there is going to be a single abstract method which is going to load the user detail from any storage system, and it can be in memory user detail or it can be a database regardless of whatever is a storage system. So the purpose of this method is to load the user details from the storage system based upon a given username. Now this interface is extending by another interface which is user detail manager. So this is user detail manager has many other abstract methods. The very first one is the create user, which is going to create a new user based upon the object that we are trying to provide as the input. The type of the object that we need to provide for this method is user details. So basically, whenever we try to create new user or whenever we try to register a new account, this is the method which is going to be used by Spring Security framework to create the user detail inside the storage system. Now in the next scenario where the end user wants to update his or her details, in such scenarios the method update method is going to come into picture, followed by the delete user, which is going to delete the user detail from the storage system based upon the username that we are trying to provide as an input. But in the scenario where the end user simply wants to change the password, in such scenario, instead of using the update user, we are going to use the change password method. So this method is going to accept what is old password and what is the new password. And at last, there is also a helper method available inside this interface, which is user exists. So for example, if someone wants to understand if there is a user available inside a storage system based upon a given username before actually performing any authentication, so then they can use this method. So here you may have a question, which is why there is a separation of user details service and user detail manager. So there is a very good question and there is a very good reason why Spring Security team they separated these two interfaces with some of their methods. The very first interface that we see on the top is user detail service. So the reason why these interface have method which is going to help only load your user detail by username. In sometimes organization, they simply always want to authenticate the user. They never have a scenario where the end user is going to come and directly register using their website or using their API. So if they don't have a scenario of creating the user, they can simply go with the user detail service implementation alone. So the implementation class of this interface, it is always going to read the user details. So when we are going to read the user details during the login attack. So there will be some organization when they will give some credential to the end user and they want them to use those credential always during the login. So they will not give flexibility to restart a new account or to update the details or to change the password. So for such scenarios, having an implementation class of the interface alone is going to be sufficient. But coming to the scenario where if an organization want to have a complete functionality of user details like creating, updating, deleting, changing. So in those particular scenario, the implementation would be the user detail manager interface. So basically this user detail manager, it is going to support all the CRUD operations. CRUD means your C means your create, R means your read. So this read functionality is going to get from the parent interface, and U means update and D means delete. So with this, it should be very clear for you if an organization looking for an option to provide all CRUD operations to the end user, then they have to implement the user detail manager interface. Otherwise, if they are using or looking for authenticating end user, they need to implement user detail service. So these are the interfaces or the contracts provided by the Spring Security that they need to follow whenever we are dealing with the user details inside the storage system. But the beauty of the Spring Security is the team didn't sit idle by just providing the contract or by just providing the interface. Instead, they provide some of the implementation classes as well. For example, in-memory user detail manager is the implementation class of the user detail manager. So we saw previously whenever we want to create the user inside in memory of the application, we can simply use the implementation class. We explored the class a lot in the previous sessions, since this is a very common requirement for many organizations who are getting started around the Spring Security. And what Spring Security team has done is behind the scenes, they have provided this in-memory user detail manager class, which is an implementation of your user detail manager inside the library itself. The next two common requirements people may have to store the user detail inside the database. So to handle such scenario, we can use the JDBC user detail manager. So apart from JDBC and in memory, one more common approach to store the user detail is LDAP. So LDAP is one of the legacy style of storing the user detail inside a storage system. Not many companies that they are going to use the LDAP system, but if some organization they are using this LDAP storage system, they can happily leverage the LDAP user detail manager provided by the Spring Security team. For some reasons, if all these three options they are not helping you, then you can also implement your own implementation of custom implementation of user detail manager. So we are going to explore the option of building our own custom implementation in the upcoming sessions. For now, I am assuming you are very much clear about the role of all these three layers. The very first layer, which is an interface, user detail service, followed by another interface, which is user detail manager, followed by three different implementation classes provided by the Spring Security. And at the end, you might have seen this green arrow, which is indicate the user detail interface. The beauty of all the contract which is provided by the Spring Security team is they all leverage these user detail interface inside the Spring Security. So a user is represented by the user detail. So the user detail is an interface which is representing an end user, like what username, what is the password, what authorities the end user is going to have. To store all such details, we have a contract inside the Spring Security framework, which is user detail service. So user detail interface. So the name itself is explanatory. It is going to hold the details of the end user, and this is an interface. You can see all these methods like create, user update, these kind of methods. They are accepting the object of the user detail, and similarly the return type of the this load user by username, which is present in the user detail service, is going to be user detail itself. So regarding this user detail interface, the Spring Security team, they didn't left the library code by just defining the contract or interface representing an end user. So instead, what they have done, they have also provided a sample implementation of this interface. So the sample implementation of class is the user. So we have a user class inside the Spring Security framework, which is implementation of the user detail interface. Let's just move to the IntelliJ to understand more over the interfaces and the classes. And also let's just quickly validate all this inside the framework code. So first, let me open the user details service interface. So inside this interface, we have the single abstract method, which is load user by username. So the return type of this method is the user detail. So user detail is an interface representing the end user details. So if I try to look into the methods available inside this interface, user details, so we have get username, get password, get authority. So these three, these are the methods which are going to store the username, password, and authorities of the end user. Apart from that, we are also having other abstract method like is account non-expired, is account not logged, to identify if a given account is expired or not. And similarly, to identify if a given account is logged or not, we have is account non-logged. And after this method, we are also having is credential non-expired. So this method is going to help us identify credential of an end user is expired. And at last, we are also having a method understanding if a given user account is enabled or not. So in this scenario where you want to log the end user after 3 or 4 invalid items, in such scenario, we can log the account and use this method to understand if the account is logged or not. Now let me go to the another interface, which is user details manager, or we can simply go to the user details service and click on here, and you can see the user detail manager. And user detail manager is extending the user detail service. So this interface is basically extending the user detail service interface, and inside this interface we have methods like create username, password, create user, delete user, and load user by username. So it is inherited from the user detail service. So that's what you can also see here inside the IntelliJ. And if we try to see the implementation class of this interface, so you can find in memory user detail manager. and JDBC User Detail Manager. So whenever we want to store the user detail inside the memory, we can go with in memory, or otherwise if we want to store the user details or user detail information inside the databases, we can go with JDBC User Detail Manager. So you can also see there is no implementation of the LDAP, so you need to add some couple of dependencies to enable that class. For now, these are the two main classes which we are mostly working. So let's move to our next class, which is user, or next interface, which is user details interface. So this we have discussed. Now let's go to its implementation. So we have this user as an implementation. So if you can see, so if you try to look for all the methods inside this class, it has all the methods from the parent interface, and for example, get authorities. So user, for example, the get authorities. So it has a logic returning the authorities, and for get password, get username, it is having the same logic of returning the password and username. And for remaining method also, it has logic of returning the it has the logic of returning the value stored inside the respective variables. And for example, I don't have any set of method to set the username or set the password inside this, if you can see. So but with this you may have a question, which is then how to set this variable into the object of the user. So this is very much simple. If you observe, there is a constructor. So you need to use this constructor to populate all the things, and you have two different types of constructor here. Yes. So the very first is going to accept only username and your password and the authorities, and the remaining fields it is going to populate true by default. So till now, like I'm hope you are very much clear about all the interfaces and classes that we have discussed so far. So inside this lecture, so please try to remember all of these interfaces names and class names. So these are very much important for you Spring Security related interviews. So without knowing these interfaces and classes, you can't explain any Spring Security concept. So I hope you liked the video. Just do like, share and subscribe to our channel. So I will catch you in the next lecture. Thank you. Bye bye.